lefties. This is Leftist ASMR, and today I am back with another political themed video. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the topic of what the word liberal means, because the word not only has a few different meanings and a few different types of contexts, but the word also is interesting because it's also evolved throughout the years and how it's used and how it's thought of. The reason that I was initially interested in researching this topic a little bit and making a video on it is because the word liberal has confused me for a while. The word liberal is often used in leftist spaces, and I would obviously consider myself a leftist based on the name of my channel, Leftist ASMR. And I maybe assume that a lot of you are lefties, not all of you, but so maybe you've heard the term liberal used. But the term is used oftentimes on the left to mean almost as like a critique of the moderate. So they might call liberals someone who's more moderate or on the center of the political spectrum. But in the past, when I was younger, I thought the word liberal to mean more of someone who's on the left of the political spectrum, someone who's maybe, a Democrat who's more like, I guess, on the left. But that has definitely changed. The way that I use the word liberal has changed throughout the years, and I think a lot of the ways people change, a lot of people have changed the way they use the word liberal throughout the years. I know my parents are confused when I'm referring to a politician like Joe Biden as a liberal in a more, I guess, derogatory way, because they always thought the word liberal meant something positive that I may think is as a positive thing. So there's just a lot of confusion surrounding the word and as to what it means. So I was hoping I could just maybe clear some of that up to all of you. Maybe you're thinking the same thing. So to start, I thought I would just explain how the dictionary defines liberal. And in the Britannica Dictionary, it defines neoliberalism as the ideology and policy model that emphasizes the value of the free market competition, laissez-faire economics and economic growth, and that economic growth is a means to human progress. So I kind of paraphrase it a little bit, but that's pretty much exactly what it says in the dictionary. And what I interpret that to mean is that it's an economic ideology that free markets are a positive thing and that we should have an open economy with less regulation by the government. And so that's just what the dictionary says. But there's a few different other definitions of the word liberal and liberalism that you can take. And it kind of falls into three categories. So there's like the economic definition, there's the political definition, and then there's like the academic definition, which I will also read to you. So the economic definition, for economic liberalism, is the response to the economic crisis of the 1970s stagflation, the energy crisis, the near bankruptcy of New York. The response to these crises was conservative in nature, pushing back against the economic management of the mid-century period. It's sometimes known as Washington Consensus, a set of 10 policies that became the new economic common sense. These policies included reduction of top marginal tax rates, the liberalization of trade, privatization of government services, and deregulation. These became the sensible things for generic people in Washington and other global headquarters to embrace and promote, and these policies were pushed on other countries via global institutions like the International Monetary Fund. So kind of like I was explaining earlier, it definitely ties into that first definition I read, which is that it kind of means loosening government regulation of the economy, which is the economic definition. So just like a looser restraints on the economy by the government, more of a free market, kind of what we think of now as what either moderates or Republicans want to do with the economy. Is just like get rid of regulations, kind of let the free market run itself. That's the economic definition of liberalism. The political definition of liberalism is definitely tied, and I'll read it to you right now. It's most commonly used to refer to the successful attempt to move the Democratic Party to the center in the aftermath of the conservative victories in the 1980s. So basically, this is kind of how I view the term liberalism, which is that the Democratic Party has adopted liberalism as a means to kind of gain more moderate support and Republican support. It's the idea that we're going to loosen up the economy a little bit, decrease regulation to gain more support from the right side of the political spectrum, maybe more voters on the right. And then there's the last definition of liberalism, which is called academic liberalism, and this is the third meaning of neoliberalism and most often used in academic circles. Encompasses market supremacy or the extension of markets or market-like logic into more and more spheres of life. So now that we kind of have a basis as to what liberalism means in a few different contexts in terms of the economy, politics, and academics, we can kind of understand more broadly that it's just a more general move to loosening up the economy, loosening up regulations in general, and is often used as a tactic by the Democratic Party to seem more moderate or on the right to kind of gain that side of voters so that they can maybe win elections. And we can see that nowadays when for instance, we call Joe Biden a liberal, it's because we consider him in the moderate, in the middle, and he's using policies that appeal more to the right side of the political spectrum or the moderate side of the political spectrum, which are like loosening up the economy, having less government intervention, less welfare, things like that, which could appeal more to a moderate or Republican base. And it's a political strategy or political ideology. So there are criticisms of liberalism on both sides of the political spectrum, on the left side and the right side. So it's important to kind of understand what are those criticisms, how they kind of go hand in hand, and how they differ. So, example of the criticisms on the right side of the political spectrum is the rise of Donald Trump is an example of how anti-liberalism has come to be popular. So I'll read. Donald Trump and other nativist anti-trade populists, there's a growing chorus of people extolling the virtues of neoliberalism, things that Trump believes, and people that support Trump who are populists on the right who are against liberalism may be like immigration, or they might believe that we should have more trade barriers between the United States and China. That's like a government intervention that people who are on the right side of the political spectrum or people who are populists who voted for Trump might agree with. And then on the left side of the political spectrum, on the left, there are also criticisms of liberalism. An example of that might be that corporations and business interests have too much power in our electoral system by allowing campaigns to be largely funded by large corporations like Goldman Sachs and McDonald's. There are ideological criticisms of liberalism on both the right side and the left side of the political spectrum as well. On the right, the anti-liberals locate the root of the problem in liberalism's social doctrines, its emphasis on secularism and individual rights. In their view, these ideas are solvents breaking down America's communities and ultimately dissolving the very social fabric the country needs to prosper. Examples of this could be like gay marriage, looser restrictions on abortion, looser restrictions on immigration, things like that. So on the right side of the political spectrums, the main issues people have with liberalism and less government, intervention is that there is less government deciding what is okay and what is not okay. It is the government fully expelling itself from upholding traditional values, which is something that people on the right side of the political spectrum often wanted to be upheld by the government. So then on the left side of the political spectrum, there's a completely different ideological argument against liberalism, and it's more economic. So liberalism's core error in this view on the left comes from a mistake in its vision of democracy. Liberals support democracy as a matter of principle, believing that individuals have a right to shape decisions that affect their lives in deep and important ways. But liberals curiously exclude parts of the economic life from this zone of collective self-determination, seeing the markets as a place where people have individual but not collective rights. Liberalism sees nothing wrong with the heads of Amazon and Facebook, making decisions that have implications for the entire economy. So as long as capitalists are free from democratic constraint, leftists argue liberal democracy is on dangerous footing. The super rich use the power of their accumulated wealth provides to influence political life, rearranging policy to protect and expand fortunes. To kind of re-explain that in my own words, people on the left don't like liberalism because they believe that we need to have a government that's going to step in and regulate the economy, and more specifically large corporations, because on the left people believe that corporations have too much power if unregulated. So if liberals believe that the government should not be regulating the economy, and leftists believe that governments need to be regulating the economy in order to stop corporations from having too much power, they're directly at odds when you really think about it. I would agree with what the leftists believe. I believe because in an economy where it's unregulated, corporations have too much power because they're able to use their money to kind of control the democracy, which is what I would argue is happening right now. Another more maybe simple way to explain what it means to be a liberal is by kind of giving examples of politicians that could be considered liberal in the Democratic Party. So when we think of liberal and the Democratic Party, we think are politicians that are more moderate, maybe politicians that are more easily able to appeal to a Republican base or a more conservative base. And when I think of those politicians, what comes to mind is politicians like Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Andrew Cuomo. These are all politicians who I would consider to be liberal Democrats. That's not to say there are no liberals on the Republican Party either. So there are Republicans that I would consider liberal who have liberal economic theories. A lot of them do. And I would say that the more moderate, less populist Republicans are ones that are most easily described as liberal, or that the word liberal has the best fit to. So Republicans like George Bush or Mitt Romney could easily be considered liberal Republican politicians. So there are liberals in both parties by the definition of liberal. I'd also like to take a moment to kind of discuss how you can use the word liberal in that lens to talk about the Democratic 2020 primary election. So Democratic presidential candidate, or now President-elect, Joe Biden is squarely liberal in the mode of the Clinton family. So Hillary and Bill Clinton, he kind of falls into that moderate right in the middle, like the Clintons. He was a supporter of NAFTA and championed the market-based Affordable Care Act over universal health care. So the more liberal option in those two policies between Medicare for All and the Affordable Care Act, which is Obamacare, would be the Affordable Care Act, because it still allows for private corporations to be controlling the market for health insurance, while Medicare for All gets rid of the private option altogether and just gives you a public government-run option. Other major contenders remain a bit of a mystery on where they stand on the liberal-left divide. Some observers thought Kamala Harris avoided tipping her hat in her recent biography, while Pete Buttigieg is also hard to pin down. A lot of people, or a lot of supporters of Pete Buttigieg and Kamala Harris, would probably argue that they are more left than liberal. They're more economically, they would argue for more economically involved government than I would probably agree with. But it is hard maybe to pin down exactly what their political ideologies are, whether or not they are true liberals. I would probably argue that they are economically liberal, politically liberal, and academically liberal. To kind of juxtapose those candidates, Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, and Joe Biden, I would point out Bernie Sanders to be kind of the opposite of that, as someone who is not a liberal politician. I would also maybe put Elizabeth Warren in that category. She is definitely more liberal and more moderate than Bernie Sanders, but I would juxtapose her political ideology with that of the liberal candidates like Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are left-leaning. They are both in favor of national health insurance and call for the end to private health insurance to make the system work. Elizabeth Warren has maybe backtracked a little bit on this, but she has said this in the past. They're both for tax changes that would take more income from the wealthy in order to bolster Social Security and other welfare. They're both for greater regulations on banking and lending industry and the creation of post office banking. To kind of put that in moderates, Elizabeth Warren, are for more policies that are more government interventionalist. They believe that the government should have a place in welfare and regulating the economy, regulating corporations and what they're doing, and just having a bigger role in the citizens and how they're functioning economically in the country. My problem with liberals is they don't see the current system as inherently flawed. Liberals are more moderate in nature and believe that the system is not really the issue, but the issue is that there's just not quite enough government regulation involved, or there's maybe a little too much government regulation involved. They don't believe that the system is inherently flawed. To me, voters need to understand the fundamental differences between liberalism and leftism. It's the difference between a candidate who believes capitalism with just a little refereeing, so someone like Joe Biden who's a liberal, or someone like Bernie Sanders who believe that the system needs to be fully overhauled, that this economy is never going to be set up for working people, and that the system needs some serious intervention, like Bernie Sanders, or maybe some could argue Elizabeth Warren. I would believe that most Democrats, I would fall into the bucket liberal, and maybe like what they call the squad, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib. These politicians I would maybe call less liberal and more on the left. They are not liberals. They are maybe you can call radicals or leftists. And that's kind of where my ideology falls in line. What's confusing is the word liberal is used so often on both sides of the political spectrum to describe someone who is like pro-gay marriage or pro-civil rights. But I don't know if that's a super accurate usage of the word liberal. I wouldn't use the word liberal like that. I would say like that person's in favor of basic human rights. I wouldn't say that person's a liberal, because liberal I think more to mean someone who is economically less interventionalist and is more on the moderate or the middle of the political spectrum. I would not ever call myself a liberal. I would maybe use the word liberal to critique a moderate in the Democratic Party. Sometimes my parents might say, Eric, you're too liberal, to mean, Eric, you're too leftist or too radical, but I don't think that's an accurate word to use to describe me, because I think the word liberal means moderate, and I would never use the word liberal to describe myself. I wonder what you all think, whether you all describe yourselves as liberal, kind of how you view the word liberal used, whether you use it to describe which politicians. Do you consider Bernie Sanders to be liberal, or do you consider Joe Biden to be liberal? Do you consider them both to be liberal? Do you consider Donald Trump to be liberal? All really interesting dialogue that I would love if you all had in the comments. I would love to get involved too. I think this video was important for me to make, because in future videos I might be using the word liberal to critique different moderates or Joe Biden's presidency, and I didn't really want so much confusion. And I know that I was, very confused as to the term, so if you have any questions or any comments or disagreements or anything like that, you can put those down in the comments. Please subscribe. I would really appreciate it. I'm trying to grow my channel, which is at 500 subscribers. Also, if you have any ideas for if I should do anything for hitting 500 subscribers, any 500 subscriber specials, you can also just comment that down below.